Salut mes amis, bienvenue. That is, welcome to an unofficial response to yesterday's League of Reason blogTV call-in show. The topic essentially was the rights of parents to teach their kids as they please versus the rights of those children to be properly and accurately educated. Now, this is an issue that I have a lot of split feelings about because it is such a deep question of which freedoms I prefer. The freedom to believe versus the freedom to learn. Ultimately, I think the freedom to learn does, in some way, override the freedom to believe, but only in specific circumstances, when what is believed is clearly wrong, and that belief is being taught or forced upon others. What this entails as far as actions are concerned, and not merely theoretical discussions over what constitutes rights and the weight those rights carry, I'm not entirely sure. I have no concrete opinion on that yet, and it's probably going to be a while until I do. Now, what I want to move on to is something that wasn't really discussed yesterday. Andromeda's Wake, in particular, mentioned that kids get laughed at for believing silly things when the subject comes up in the kids' classroom. This is a thought-provoking situation, but one that is not unfamiliar to me. I actually lost a friendship. Well, it went from being best friends to just normal friends when I was in elementary school because of this very phenomenon. I was not being laughed at. Rather, I did the laughing. A friend stated and showed how he was taught that dinosaurs lived with Adam and Eve. I thought this was stupid, so I ridiculed him as any 8 or 9 or 10-year-old boy or whatever it was would do so when presented with something that seemed stupid as hell. While this is something I'm personally familiar with, though, I became familiar with it in a completely different way today. The fall semester began today, and on this first day, my last class was Intro to Ecology. Now, through independent study and way too much YouTube, I know a lot about what's coming up in the class. Over the summer, I developed quite a keen interest in the subject of evolution through natural selection, which forms one of the main points of the class. Today, however, was just day one. As such, especially in early undergrad, the day was spent going over a goddamn syllabus and then some introductory information necessary to understand the class. My professor went over information that I learned, at least in middle school, and a lot of it in elementary. I seriously learned about nothing new, and probably could have taught the lecture. Okay, just for example, this is how basic the lecture was. Now, I understand it was a review, but still, this is way too basic for the college or university level. Essentially, she had to go, next is a population. A population is... Next is a community. A community is... And that kind of bullshit, continuing, so on and so forth. You have that same theme going across. Basic ass definitions. Now, I'll get back to this in a bit. But being the inquisitive bastard I am, and I also showed up late, I went to her after class to ask a few questions. I was interested in how deep she was going to go into the subject of evolution by natural selection. She explained it to me, and I explained to her my interest in the subject. It's probably going to form a cornerstone in my work in the history of science. Just to catch you guys up, I plan on studying the history and sociology of science, more so the history, but the sociology helps explain it in terms of cultural relevance and help make it applicable to modern times in an effective and coherent manner, and not to mention directly as well. She then explained why she had to teach the review of basic biology. She even had to define what a membrane is, by the way, because of this goddamn fake controversy over evolution by natural selection, and especially its damning effects in the American South. She also apologized because she said she's going to have to continue teaching at such a basic level, not just for the review, but for the rest of the class, just in the hopes. Now, let me repeat that. In the hopes that she can reach some of the people who have been raised to just shut their minds off when even the very word evolution is brought up. She is forced to encounter much more difficulty than ought to be the case in a functioning educational system. This would be acceptable if it was a graduate course on a legitimately controversial subject. This, however, is an entry-level course, core requirement, science, sequence, class. It's nothing but the basics of the field, and the undisputed basics at that. This is not the realm of academic debate. There's a reason why it's called an introduction to the course. So not only does this affect her, and not only is it representative of something horribly wrong in our educational system, this affects me. This affects the rest of the class that does have an open mind. This affects those of us who weren't indoctrinated into a belief system from an early age that is so at odds with reality. This affects those of us who are at school to learn new and interesting things. This is because considerable amounts of time have to be dedicated to covering ridiculously basic subject material that should already be understood to be true because of previous levels of education. There should be a review just to make sure everyone's on the same page, as was the case today. But the entire class should know the basics enough instead of having to cover this for the next half of the semester. We should be introduced to the actual study of ecology, not just the basic biology that forms the foundation for it. We need to cover this material, as I said, and I now emphasize yet again. But the entire class should not be this. In a society with an educational system based on observable facts rather than fake political controversy, this would not be the case at all. The teacher could actually teach new information rather than spend the little amount of time we have correcting falsehoods from ideologies which are demonstrably incorrect over and over and over again. The education system could be built upon itself with each successive level, rather than spend half the class going over and over and over again the absolute basics, which shouldn't really be needed at the level of higher education. Those of us who are fortunate enough to not be brainwashed have to suffer through all this nonsense and put plainly bullshit over and over and over again. This is not an issue that just affects those who are misinformed from birth and their chances at success and acceptance in society or academia. This is an issue that affects every single goddamn person who wants to learn any goddamn thing ever. I know people last night said that it matters to society, but it wasn't focused on much. Yes, what was looked at instead was incredibly important, but we should not forget about the effects that this has on absolutely everyone involved. Anyway, I'm bound to tell, and I just don't understand all of this blatant ignorance, or how the display of such is something to be proud of. Au revoir, mes amis.